And we will go ahead and dive in as folks continue to join us. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia, a bookseller with Politics and Prose. We're live with Aimee Bender and Bethanne Patrick discussing The Butterfly Lampshade. You can follow the link in the chat to purchase the book directly from us at Politics and Prose. If you have a question for our speakers, use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We'll move to questions in the last portion of the discussion, though we apologize in advance if we run short on time. Additionally, we're glad to offer closed captioning for this event via Zoom's auto captioning service. If you want to enable captions, click the CC live transcript icon at the bottom of the screen. And we do want to thank all of you out there for joining us. We are so grateful to our family of loyal customers who keep our business and our spirits afloat. And now to this incredible book. On the night her single mother is taken to a mental hospital after a psychotic episode, 8-year-old Francie is staying with her babysitter, awaiting to take the train to Los Angeles to live with her aunt and uncle. There is a lovely lamp next to the couch on which she's sleeping, the shade adorned with butterflies. When she wakes, Francie spies a dead butterfly exactly matching the ones on the lamp, floating in a glass of water. She drinks it before the babysitter can see. 20 years later, Francie is compelled to make sense of that moment and two other incidents, her discovery of a desiccated beetle from a school paper and a bouquet of dried roses from some curtains. Her recall is exact. She is sure these things happened, but despite her certainty, she wrestles with the hold these memories maintain over her and what they say about her relationship to reality. Aimee Bender is the author of the novels The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake, a New York Times bestseller, and An Invisible Sign of My Own, and of the collections The Girl in the Flammable Skirt, Willful Creatures, and The Color Master. In conversation with her is Bethanne Patrick, the editor most recently of The Books That Changed My Life, Reflections by 100 Authors, Actors, Musicians, and Other Remarkable People. Her monthly column on hot books appears in the Washington Post, and you can find her on Twitter at @thebookmaven. On behalf of Politics and Prose, please join me in welcoming Aimee Bender and Bethanne Patrick. So nice to have you both.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Bethanne. So nice to be here.
Thank you, Julia. And Aimee, it's a delightful pleasure to be here talking to you about The Butterfly Lampshade. And I want to say to everyone who's gathering, just in time, you are here so that you can listen to Aimee read from the first chapter of The Butterfly Lampshade, and Julia is going to join her in a little role playing. And so we'll learn more about Francie and her Aunt Min and what things are like at this very important juncture in Francie's life. Thank you both.
Of course, and I'll just say this is the first chapter, so you don't need any real setup, but I'm going to be two characters. Julia has kindly agreed to join me. But it should all reveal itself because it's the first chapter. So you're as in the dark as any reader jumping in. We cannot tend to her. There's something wrong with her.
What do you mean? What is wrong with her?
We do not know. Something.
She seems like such a normal little girl to me. Last visit,
it is hidden.
Did she do anything? Did she do something bad?
No.
Then what?
We cannot handle her. I cannot.
But what do you mean by that? Is she misbehaving?
No.
Is she getting into trouble at school?
You have to come get her.
I don't understand.
You are the godparents. You have to come. That is your job.
But you are alive, Elaine.
I'm telling you, I can't do it.
Where's that new guy you were telling me about?
Camping.
Is he coming back?
I don't know.
Are you going to do something, Elaine?
I could call social services. Maybe I will. Are they listed? Will they do foster care if other family is still available?
Can you put her on the phone?
No.
Is she nearby?
She's right here. She's looking right at me.
Can you tell her to come on the phone?
Francie dear, your Aunt Minnie wants to speak to you.
Hello? Francie?
Hello.
Francie, are you okay?
Yes.
You've been listening to our conversation?
Yes.
Your mother is very worried about you. Do you think you might be doing anything wrong?
No.
Have you been going to school?
Yes.
Are you behaving properly in school?
Yes.
Are you going to bed on time?
Yes.
I have to tell you, I'm more worried about your mother. Do you think she might be getting sick again?
Yes.
Can you tell me what she's doing?
No.
You can tell me. I know she's probably listening, but it's okay, really. She knew I would ask you. Is she hurting you in any way at all?
No.
Is she dressed?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Are you feeling okay?
Yes.
Do you need me to come up there?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Can you tell me what you mean by yes? As in why?
No.
Is your mom's friend there?
No.
He's out of town?
I don't know.
Is anyone else there?
No.
Is your mother hurting herself?
No.
Sweetie, I am so sorry. I just can't come this time. Not right now. I'm too pregnant. I'm not allowed to go on a plane. Your uncle can, though. You want your uncle to come?
No.
Oh, Francie, who is the best grown-up for you to call?
It's me again, Min. She dropped the phone. She's standing by the wall now. She puts her nose right up against the wall. It's touching the wall.
What is happening over there?
Like she is talking to the wall. She has this look, Min.
Kids have looks.
No, other kids don't have this look.
Elaine, she can hear the whole conversation, for God's sake.
She is judging me all the time.
Kids don't judge, not like that.
She does.
You're still on the Abilify?
I cannot be around her. There's something in her. There's a bug in her. I cannot even trust myself around her. Are you listening to me?
Yes, I'm sending Stan up the minute he gets home, morning flight.
Not Stan, you.
I can't fly. What do you mean a bug?
A bug in her, something crawling inside her.
Can she stay somewhere else? Where can she stay?
I don't know.
A friend?
I don't like her friends.
A friend of yours.
She loves her babysitter.
Ask the babysitter. Of course, tomorrow, or I'll call her too. We can both call her, okay? This is the one who also works at the school?
Shrina.
I have her number. We'll work something out, honey. You have to call your doctor. We'll both call the doctor.
I know I should. I know I do.
And I will too. So that's a start. We have a plan then.
We do?
We'll both make some calls in the morning, okay? Let's go over the plan. What are you going to do tomorrow?
I'm going to call my doctor.
Good. And
I'm going to call my doctor.
if you feel able, ask the babysitter.
Right. And I will ask the babysitter.
What are you going to ask the babysitter?
If she will take my sweet girl Francie, but what do I mean again? Where will she take her?
You know what? I'll call Shrina. Don't worry about that. You take care of yourself. Maybe Francie can stay with her for a couple days while we get you feeling better. Do you know where she lives?
She's very young.
Francie?
The babysitter.
It's just until Stan can get up there. I'll tell her he'll be coming as soon as he can.
How many months are you again?
8.5. So that's the plan for tomorrow. But what about tonight?
Tonight. Exactly.
Does she have a lock on the door?
Her bedroom door? Yes, she does. She asked for that.
What do you mean? She asked for a lock?
Last year for her birthday.
You're kidding me. Did she ask for anything else?
Is that odd?
Just a lock.
Yes.
Unbelievable. But okay, she's a smart girl. It's very useful. From the inside?
Yes.
And how about you?
We can both lock our doors from the inside.
Okay, you need to do that then. Why don't you do that as soon as we get off the phone? Use the bathroom first, then go to bed. You'll call me tomorrow morning?
Yes.
You'll call the doctor?
Yes.
You'll call me if you need anything, absolutely anything.
Yes.
Tell Francie goodbye. Tell her I love her.
You're on speaker. She can hear you.
Jesus. Goodbye, Francie. Did you hear that about locking your door?
Yes.
I love you, Francie.
She doesn't say I love you.
I will say it anyway. She doesn't have to say it back. I love you, Francie.
Goodbye, Min. Thank you so much. I love you.
I love you too, Elaine. We'll figure this out.
Thank you. I love you.
I love you too, Elaine. Go to your room now, honey. Good night.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you. I will disappear myself.
It's great to hear you.
Wow. Reading that chapter was very emotional. Hearing that chapter is even more emotional. And anyone who has ever had a person in their life who is suffering from some sort of mental illness or disorder knows that that was not an easy conversation for any of the parties involved to have.
Exactly.
And yet, when I started reading your book, Aimee, I thought, we're really going to have a conversation about families and mental illness. And then I kept reading your book and I thought, oh my goodness, there's so much more going on here. And so, although I think we will jump back to talking about families and coping strategies and what it's like for young children to experience a parent in this kind of distress, I have to start with the fact that this is a book filled with the kind of magical realism that you may be known for, but that also doesn't necessarily tie up with a neat little bow. Does that resonate with you?
It does. It does. And I suppose I kind of lean pretty hard on a sort of intuitive impulse when I'm writing, and to feel like I want to make the image as tangible and sort of haunting as possible so that it gets inside the reader and it's already kind of something I'm feeling a little obsessed with or interested in exploring. And then I guess my hope is that it will accrue enough sort of resonance that the meaning can cook inside the reader over time. And I think that's, yeah.
That's exactly what it does. And by the time I finished the Butterfly Lampshade, I was thinking of Yorka, I was thinking of Kundera, I was thinking of all kinds of writers who have taken those themes and images and symbols and allowed them to cook in the reader, but not garnish the dish, I guess you would say, is it, if that's fair. Yeah. By the time I was finished, but yet the dish isn't garnished, but it's such a satisfying meal.
Thank you. Well, thank you. That's the great
welcome.
Because it's obviously not going to be true for all readers, but I think the hope is that there's something emotionally that gets held and carried through the book, and that I just always feel like if I like the maybe here's sort of the example. It's not a book example, though I can pull many from books too, but I think often of the image in 2001 of this monolith that sort of Kubrick puts in like various stages. And there's all these theories about what this sort of humming, monolith thing, and what does it mean? And yet I don't care what it means, and it makes me cry. And I love that is an experience that I have. Or if I think of Kafka and I think of Gregor Samsa turning into a bug, and we can figure out meanings for it. But Ben Okri talked about Kafka recently on the New Yorker podcast, which was so beautiful, like these sort of lost writings of Kafka's. And he says there's something about Kafka that every time you finish it, you feel compelled to go back. And every time you read it, you have maybe less answers. He says it more beautifully.
But that is kind of beautiful. I mean, that is one of the reasons, I didn't mention Kafka because, let's face it, we're going to be talking about butterflies and beetle. I thought, I don't want to be too on the nose, but since you brought Kafka up, we could definitely go there. And this is the thing, if you want something to cook in a reader, you can't, I'm sorry, I am not the writer, Aimee is, so I may stretch a metaphor to its limits, but you can overbake something.
Right.
For instance, and I don't want to spoil anything in the book for readers who have not enjoyed it already, but you think the butterfly lampshade, well, oh my gosh, it's the title. And yes, it's really important. And we know, those of us who have read it, that the butterfly also becomes something really important to Francie. But there's also this beetle, and the beetle has a metamorphosis in a way. And I, again, trying not to spoil anything, but when that happened, when that occurred on the train trip, I just gasped and thought, this is what I'm here for. This is what I'm here for. Surprise me like this, and surprise me in a way that I need to figure it out. That I need to decide how close or far this is. And it's very, very creepy, but fortunately, Francie is safe. Okay. I just want everyone to know that Francie, through everything that happens to her, Francie is safe. I think that's important in novels that feature, animals and small children. But there are things that are never explained. There are things that are not overwrought or overdone the way I stretch metaphors, Aimee. And so do those things, are they things that you work on? Do they come to you all of a sudden? And I know this is almost an unfair question to ask an author, but I think in this kind of case, with the way you're writing, it's interesting to know if you can explain a bit.
Sure, you bet. And I get sort of drawn to an image in the butterfly, this image of a butterfly falling out of a lamp. And she didn't see it fall out, but it just emerges in this glass of water and it's dead. And so there was this like information about the images that I could kind of take stock of. They all showed up dead. What was that about? What did that mean? And it's not like I just can feel that there is a meaning in that without maybe putting a direct word to it. And something you were saying made me, just that beetle moment. I'm glad that you say that. It makes me so happy to hear that you gasped. That's just wonderful to hear, because that moment also felt very important to me. And I think the more I think about it now and I don't think this provides any spoiler, but just that the way in certain moments of life, particularly moments that are fraught, it does feel like you're existing in a slightly different realm than in other moments and passages of one's life. And that things happen in that realm that don't happen at other times. There's a kind of different sort of rupturing of possibility. And
slippage.
Fiction, you can make that really overt and tangible. Like fiction can do anything, which is one of the things that I love. Like there's no budget. Like you can just rip the world, you can make things happen so freely with a sentence, and how thrilling that is. So I think it felt like so much of the book in my mind is about these two, that Francie is a character who has a foot in two different worlds, and that the other characters don't. Like she is the sort of traversing person. And so these are kind of connected in some way to that. And they happen at a certain phase of her life. And I don't expect that they're going to happen again. It's not like this is sort of like in the particular sadness of Lemon Cake, there was a power that the character was going to carry through her life. It was part of her person. But for Francie, it feels like it's more about a kind of particular time and the access or the difference that one feels at that time. And so the beetle and the butterfly and the rose, and at one point there was a pear, but the pear was just too many things. But I could also there's one part where she has a kind of interview intake session with the doctor, and the doctor is kind of interviewing her. And I was also via the doctor sort of discovering, as both of them, discovering things and noticing that there was a progression in the images that I had chosen. There was a butterfly, there was a beetle, and then there were roses. So, and the doctor says, like, how interesting that they're progressing from the, from flora to fauna.
Yes.
But me too, that felt like, is that something too about growth and change, and that the ruptures become less dramatic and then they go away? Like, what are these things that are happening and these instances that she has to kind of process at a time in her life when they aren't happening anymore?
Well, and that's very interesting, because we see Francie, and correct me if I'm wrong, we see her from 8 to 28, but at one point she's writing, and I believe she's a bit older. Is that correct?
Not necessarily older than the 28-ish time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the things that occurred to me is to go back to the mental illness strand. Clearly, Elaine, her mother, has a deeply, deeply ingrained mental illness, severe bipolar disorder with, a psychoaffective part. And, yes, ask Dr. Bethanne. But that's pretty much from the book. And, when you have a parent with a severe mental illness, there are different ways to cope with it. We all know, for example, it's thrown around too easily, but adult children of alcoholics, and they're like this, well, there are adult children of people with psychosis. There are adult children of people with depression. And there's also the fact that Francie herself, through both symbol and experience and action, clearly believes there's something deeply wrong with her, and that she is flawed, that she carries within her the capacity for great destruction and wrongdoing. So what I wanted to ask you about that is this portrait of post-traumatic stress disorder? Is this Francie, or is there something else going on that we should look for in the symbols?
Like, is it beyond her in that way? When you say something else we should look for, is that what you mean?
At one point she says, she's watching Vicky, her cousin, whom she calls her sister, and she's watching her because Vicky's about to go off to college, and she says this is an age where things can show up in college, for many people, and especially people with severe bipolar syndrome and schizophrenia. It often shows up in late adolescence. So we know that Francie has been on the lookout for this in Vicky. And so that makes me think she's really been on the lookout for it in herself.
Exactly. No, I think the whole family, everyone in some ways is kind of on the lookout to, there's one scene where there's this sort of question of contagion and this sort of fear of how blurry are the lines here, and who will be affected. And also, and it was important to me that the character of Elaine would also be suffering from those worries as well. She's the one dealing with the illness, that's part of her life, but also she's a mother, and she's a sister, and she's an aunt, and she also feels some concern and worry. So that Francie definitely, I think, is worrying about herself. Everyone is kind of worried about her and about Vicky. There's just kind of this widespread anxiety about it, along with just worry about Elaine and how she's going to be, and if she's going to be okay. And so that it being that the whole family is kind of alert in a kind of hyper-vigilant way.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And that hyper-vigilance, I'm so glad you said that word, because that is something that's real, that's factual, that's medical, But the hypervigilance also goes back to what you and I were talking about a few minutes ago, which is what the novel can do. The novel can spread out the hypervigilance in a way that makes the reader start looking for things and makes the reader pay attention. And that's what I loved about the butterfly lampshade is, you know, you can settle back for, oh, you know, cozy read that's going to be about this family and their problems, and you know, come for the caregiving and the custody, stay for the steward and the train trip, and you know, and the tent on the balcony, all of these kinds of things. And so I know you said this in so many words, but looking for opportunities where you can have a reader sit up and pay attention. Mm-hmm. You may want that, but that doesn't mean that you can force it. Right. So what is that process like for you?
Well, I think some of it comes from me also not knowing, and that it being this sort of exploration process, that I'll have these images and I'll have a voice and I'll be trying to learn about them, and that a novel for me forms out of what areas I feel compelled to continue to write about, that I'm unable to sort of outline or plan. I have tried, but it just fails. So it becomes more like an accrual of scenes, and many scenes get cleared away that just don't fit. But it felt like this sort of circling around this passage in Francie's life felt really important. And I've learned also too a lot from reading Haruki Murakami, who I feel like at certain moments in his novels does a little assessment of the symbols that he's working with. And I don't know if this is what's happening, but it certainly feels like he also is playing with certain things and then takes a step back as the novelist and is like, what have I put in the mix here? You know, what are these things that I'm playing with? And I find that so inspiring, because it also shows how much is out of awareness, right? Like that we can sort of take stock of certain things and then go deeper into the cave or explore more and find out more. So, and I think one thing, and maybe this kind of relates to what you were saying, it was really important to me that someone else would witness what Francie had witnessed, that when she sees, for example, the roses in high school at a friend's house underneath the curtains that look like desiccated roses off the curtains, that her friend sees them too, so that the reader can't just say it's all in Francie's head, that we know.
They never can. And that is also amazing for those of you who have not read The Butterfly Lampshade. That was one of the things that kept me turning pages, is it clearly was not a book about someone who was experiencing her own psychosis or who was just living in a dream world. She really had to wrestle with these things. They are seen. And of course, Vicky ends up with one of the roses that was found at Dina's house. So it's not even just something between two people as it is with Francie and the steward, her older cousin, on the train. So sometimes it's two people, sometimes it's three people, sometimes it's more, but it's definitely something that is happening in this world, in the world of this novel.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that wanting somehow, to break away from that idea of what you're saying, of putting it just in Francie. And I think when Vicky, and I don't think these are spoilers that are a problem, who knows, but just that she does.
If you're saying them, it's fine.
But like you give me a really good example of the things where meaning isn't clear to me, but the action feels clear. So here's Francie frightened of this rose. It kind of is a symbol to her of, what does this mean about me? And what does this mean? She finds no beauty in it. But Vicky, who has enough space from the situation, feels it is a beautiful, magical miracle that this rose exists, this rose sort of made from nothing. And that there's something about the ways that we hold experience that just feels right to me about that. So that's where it's like, I'll feel like this feels right, that the relative who has the distance can hold the thing that to someone else would feel so fraught and so full of fear and confusion. And it's just like, to make it, to me, it always feels like the magical move is to make something tangible that otherwise would be hard for me to talk about or think about. But now I have a rose that I can describe that has a smell and a crinkly texture. and that becomes hopefully then for something that the reader can be like, that feels right to me. I don't even know quite why yet. And that may encounter something where they're like, ah, that's like that rose.
Exactly. Now, I want to say we've got a few questions coming up, and so a couple of things. One, I want to say to everyone, drop your questions in there because we are going to get to them. And in fact, I think I may get to one of them a little early because of something I want to talk about, which is what you just said about the tangibility of things. Yeah. One of the ideas that the butterfly lampshade brought up for me is the idea of holding space for people. Holding space for people without forcing them to say, this is how I feel, or, fixing things. I'm amazed at how beautiful and tender Francie's family is to her in this crisis. There's no, oh, we're not going to take her, or foist the kid off on someone else, or anything like that. Yeah. It's very, very beautiful and very, very careful. They are careful to find a steward to bring her on the train because she doesn't like airplanes. Yeah. They treat her so beautifully and make a room for her carefully when she lives there. There's so much about that. And so one of the questions that we have from an anonymous attendee is, can you talk about Francie's decision to start conducting her own used goods shop from home? How does that connect to the themes of the book? And I thought, Francie is holding space for other people and their dreams. And I want to let you answer this too, but I just remember one particular passage when she's talking about several things that she's managed to buy and that are going off to their new owners. And she's saying, this was nothing for this woman who had a broken friendship, but now this particular bowl is going to make someone else's life so happy. And so definitely, I don't mean to answer a question that's for Aimee, but I thought that's such a beautiful thing. And I hadn't, thought of that before. So please.
Well, first, it's such a pleasure to hear you talk about it. So, please don't hesitate because it's really not for me.
Thank you.
And it's not like I'm trying to imbue meaning into the book. I'm trying to be as tangible as possible and kind of real as possible as I can with the scenes and the words and the characters, and hope that the ligaments are sort of connecting. And I feel very interested in the world of objects and how much we flood that. And I personally, as a child and an adult, sort of flood objects with meaning and feeling. And I just, and also how kind of overrun I feel like by object. Like I just love them and hate them. And so they feel endlessly interesting to me to write about. But I think it's true that there is a renewal that is meaningful to her, to find the kind of broken, forgotten thing that actually is just sort of been not seen, and sort of to pull it out and dignify it by giving it her singular eye, right? Dignify it by seeing it. She sort of talks about that. The thing just becomes sort of invisible, and that then it can become something that someone might actually want. And it's interesting because when that question and what you were saying too, that there were moments when I was writing that I was like, this connects to the idea of a butterfly. And I feel hesitant to even be writing about a butterfly because butterflies are one of the most symbolic things, right? And I'm scared. But at the same time, I had a dead butterfly, which I felt like bought me some space in terms of butterfly metamorphosis beauty, right? We all know about butterflies. But there's one moment where Vicky does comment and say, you're totally building a cocoon, when she's sitting there in a tent, sort of trying to process this. And I was like, I think I need that line there, because I think I'm also realizing it is a kind of cocoon for the character, but I also don't want it to be cliche. So I tried to make it as throwaway a line as I could, but still have it in there. Like I didn't want to give it any sort of weight on the page while still having it be like, she's transforming objects. There's something going on here. There are these various layers of change happening, but how do I let that be there and underplay it as much as possible so it doesn't buy into the like, and now
one day Francine Samsa woke up.
right, exactly. There's the dark side. Yes, there's a sort of like, sickly sweet possibility, and then the like, I just pure Kafka tribute.
But also, I think the question, and there are others for us to get to, but I love the fact that Francie is, a millennial, maybe Gen Z even. It's hard at this age to know the differences. I'm trying, but
Same.
She's living in a society less weighted by those objects, less held down. She doesn't need to have a lot in her apartment. Right. She doesn't need a lot of furniture herself. She doesn't, she might need a cocoon space for some things, but she doesn't need to have lots of bric-a-brac. And so it also helps us to see her as someone who's almost a nomad in a way.
Yeah.
And without spoiling anything, she definitely realizes where her place is. Mm-hmm. She definitely knows by the end. But I liked the fact that she chooses this buying and selling and bartering and flea market kind of life because it lets her be so untethered in the world.
Exactly. Or tethered in only the ways she chooses and not by any sort of external system. Yeah.
Now also because these are coming in, and I think this is a great way for us to talk about it. Anonymous attendee says, Francie's relationship to her cousin is so sweet. Where did you look, or what did you look to build such a compelling cousins could be sisters relationship?
Nice. I'm glad. Thank you, anonymous attendee. It seems to be often true that if I have a character that's pretty internal, which I often really like to write because it's like there's so much space again in fiction to get into the nitty-gritty of the sort of internal observations and feelings and thoughts, then it's really helpful kind of instinctively to have a character that will push that internal character to conversation. And I think Vicky is that. Like Vicky is able to be really upfront and frank with Francie, and and she's really the one person that they have a real back and forth. And that also Vicky, and in that way, it's different than the relationship with my sisters, but I always feel very identified with a younger sibling role because I just worship my older sisters. And so I would imagine Francie being like a celebrity to Vicky, to, the person that just feels like she has this magical, input into the world. And what is that like? And so that both of them really need each other in these very, very different ways. And so there's relationships in my life I can think of that feed into writing that. And it's also just the relationship of different parts of myself and different interactions with people that I'm close to, of feeling both the part of me that sort of needs to be brought out and also the part of me that likes to bring someone out. So kind of those things come into play with that character.
Well, before I bring up another question, I have to talk about another relationship in the book, which is again talking about the steward, whose name we never know, who is this distance-ish cousin of Francie's, and he is a graduate student in Seattle, and he comes to Portland to take her on the 2-day train from Portland to Los Angeles. And he is a marvelous, magical character. And again, I spoke about the tenderness that Minnie and Stan events toward Francie, but the steward, it's like a whole new level. He is, it makes my throat close up when I think of a man who can take an 8-year-old. He knows she's been through something terrible, and yet he keeps everything away. He keeps as much badness away as possible. And of course, one of the things we won't spoil is that, even with that, there's some dread that comes in. But he knows, for example, this is something, Aimee, you just killed me with this. He says to her, I'm going to read out loud. And I'm reading a book about whales. And she tells us that now as an adult, she realizes he just starts in the middle of wherever he took his bookmark from, because if he had started at the beginning, it would have forced her to pay attention. And he knew somehow instinctively that she needed to be able to just sort of let the words wash over her.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to go to a question now before the moderator cries.
You make me, I mean, it's so meaningful, Bethanne. Thank you. And I was so, I really wanted that particular passage to land. So
it landed so, so beautifully and without, and very, here we go with my metaphors again, like a butterfly's wing.
I'm so glad. Well, and it's like, I think, and maybe this is just one of the questions that I wonder about in my life, throughout my life, which is like, what is helpful? You know, when you're in pain and when someone you love is in pain, what is helpful? And so many things are not helpful. And I think I just wanted, I wanted to think at that moment what would be helpful to Francie, and that and I wanted him to be male because there's a lot of kind of wonderful female figures in the story, and it's a lot about women, I think, but I wanted there to be, I wanted the struggle and the strife in the story to be internal largely, and that the people were going to be trying and loving her and trying the best they could, which often was very good, but that there's still very heavy things going on.
Yes.
Yes. Those heavy things kind of happen without the sort of distraction of like a really obnoxious, like.
No, there didn't need to be. I mean, there already is a tragedy, Elaine's illness and her inability to live outside of her care facility. That's enough.
Yeah.
That reminds me, here we go. There's several good questions. I'm going to jump over one, which we'll come back to. Lori Foos says, hi, Aimee. Can you talk a little bit about your process and your thoughts on metaphor, which is so central to your work? I'm wondering whether your metaphors are ones you understand yourself while you're drafting, or whether you sort of discover what your metaphors mean as you move forward in the drafting process. And I think we have been talking about that, but there's certainly more that could be said. So
yeah,
thank you, Lori.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lori, for the question and your support. And it's, I don't know. In fact, if I start to know, like that's where there was this moment of thinking about the idea of butterflies and transformations that I felt like, oh no, like am I just writing about a transfer? Like, is it just that it's what is happening here? But then I felt like, okay, there's other stuff going on. Like I don't want to know what it means as much as possible. And if I start to even clue in, I want to kind of throw a wrench in that, because I don't really want the metaphors to have one meaning. I think I want them to have something, a kind of maybe general feeling or a kind of emotional interplay with the reader. But I don't want to feel like it's an equation at all, or that there is something that the reader feels like I have now figured it out and it's done. Because I think in terms of what we were talking about, like I so respond to that feeling of mystery, and it somehow really nourishes me as kind of a reader and viewer and listener and all that stuff. Like there's something about that space to let the meaning come in slowly is really helpful to me. So I think that just ends up being the world that I like to live in. So it's much more about then filling it with, as much tangibility as I can, and trying to really work with the physicality of the magic. And can I attach it to the question about magic? Because
absolutely.
BK who said, what I love to do. What do you think magical realism can do that realistic literature can't? And I love that, because I think it's related in that I feel like the world of writing is for me so much about trying to capture the things that we can't quite articulate about our lives. And that even though it's verbal, I feel like Mikhail Yassel, who has a book out now, he has a great quote about writing, where he's like, writing, the task where you spend a lot of time using words to talk about things that you can't express with words. Which feels like that is great for me. Like it just feels like it's all about this sort of world beneath the surface that is part of our lives and yet difficult to explain and articulate. And that's where the books can that's like Virginia Woolf is sort of filling in all this space about the internal life and what's going on with thoughts and emotions and ideas and history, and how do we work with that and process it. And so I think because of that, magic feels so helpful, because it doesn't feel like the realistic, I don't view realistic literature as a direct reflection of the world either. You know, like it just feels like I just want to kind of try to see things expressed that will ring true to something that I've lived, and allows me to use language around it, but it's always sort of circling around it as opposed to being able to nail it at like the center of a dartboard. Like it's just always a little more murky than that.
Well, it's like the pulse beneath the skin, which of course is something that Francie talks about when she talks about Vicky and Vicky's tender fontanelle when she's an infant, and the things that are different from us and between us and objects. Yes. How she has one particular passage in which she says, look, I know that rose and that beetle and that butterfly, I know they're not the same as me or Minnie or Vicky or Elaine. They don't have the pulse. They don't have the spark of life. So even though she goes through going to the doctors and answering all of the quizzes about various kinds of syndrome, you know that Francie is entirely sane, which makes the magical realism even more powerful. Because again, as we talked about a little earlier, you're not in the realm of someone who is slipping into psychosis or having hallucinations, so that does make it very powerful. And we do have another question from anonymous attendee about how do you avoid stereotypes and still keep it recognizable and relatable? And I think the reason, although that question is a little open-ended, I would venture to say that is talking about people who do have problems. Elaine is not just a broken shell. Elaine has a sort of gentleman collar. She likes to sing. She has certain restaurants she likes to try. I mean, she is living a tough life and it's not easy, but she still has joys and personality and bronze eyeshadow. I love that.
Yeah, and that felt really important, wanting her to be her own dignified character on the page, and that she is dealing with this, and it really isn't a time where she could be a mother anymore. Someone had asked me the other day, like, how was she able to take care of Francie this whole time up till now? And it feels like, amazingly, there was a stretch where she could function, and then there was a stretch where she couldn't. And so there was a pivot, and then things had to be rearranged and changed. But yes, I think stereotypes ultimately melt away with dimension always, because I think stereotypes become about, easy groupings that have just sort of, thin commonalities, as opposed to the way that we all are such jumbles of complexity. So I feel like it's always just sort of digging around and hanging out with the character a little longer, and people are packed with contradictions and moments of dignity and moments of shame, and like it's just all of us. So I think as soon as we get that closer look into anyone, the stereotypes tend to fall away.
I like that about dimension, keeping us, when we fill that out, it's amazing. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to get down to the other questions. It's always maddening to use this code. Yeah. The description of the home the mother stays in, Elaine, is so vivid, says anonymous attendee. How did you go about building it?
Well, and that one is sort of the most related to my direct experience, in that my aunt, my mother's sort of beloved sister, did have bipolar disorder with severe psychotic episodes. And so that's part of the kind of trickle down of what went into the book autobiographically, and that we would go visit her all the time, and she'd lived in a lot of different facilities. And it was also the 70s, and so care was really different, and options were different, drugs were different. Like it was just, and so there was a lot that kind of impressed itself upon me in terms of each different place. And often they were places that some of them were specifically for the mentally ill, and some of them were for the elderly, but they had spaces for others. And some of them were wonderful and some of them were not. And some of them she was able to live by herself. And she also had some other stuff going on that made it hard for her beyond that. So I think, like, when I think about that description of the place, I think some of it is a kind of conglomeration of various places that I went to as a kid. But then also, as happens with writing, you sort of hook upon one image, and then like it then became interesting to write about this sort of decaying European castle furniture. And I don't know that that was in any place that I saw, but I also just got interested in writing about it.
It was so perfect. And then it was riddled with termites.
Yes.
And the paintings just dissolved when they threw them away. You know, it was both very realistic and very magical realism at the same time.
Yeah,
which
right.
I think is pretty cool too, about describing a place like that, as you said, which is a conglomeration of experiences that, you know, are real, along with a place that you want to put a character like Elaine. I loved that she got a little luxury. I love that. I don't care if the termites were in the lime green silk chairs. I love that Elaine got a little grandeur in her life.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah, I like that too. And it was just, I think always with writing, it's so interesting that you make a choice that's maybe part from experience and partly unconscious and partly imaginative, but it leaves you that choice to work with. Like if it's working on the page, this is sort of when I'll teach, I'll just be like, roll with the language, like work with the image that you feel compelled to reread, to look at, like all of that allowed. So every time I kept reworking that scene, I would see a little more in the room, and then I had the room to work with for later scenes as well.
There's certainly time for more questions if anyone wants to ask them, so drop them in there. But I know we have just a few minutes left, and so because it might take a little while, I have to ask you, everyone wants to know, what is coming next, Aimee Bender? What the butterfly lampshades and paperback, we want more.
You're very kind to ask. You know, it's a great question. I definitely, like, my pandemic time has been as a mom of 7-year-olds who just turned 8. And so writing time has been really little. So maybe stories and maybe a novel, like I have little parts of both, but it's been a kind of experiment in writing for 15 minutes before the kids are awake, before they were at Zoom school. But also, I do kind of believe that writing for 15 minutes stuff does start to happen. And in fact, this book began with early writings that were very short because my kids were really little, and there were some things that kind of let me know directions of where to take it. Like that, I kept wanting to write about an aunt and an uncle as opposed to a mother and a father, but I didn't know why. And I didn't know if the mother and father were dead. Like I had a whole sort of side story where they had died, and then it was like, no, like I had to kind of learn my way into this pull towards the aunt and the uncle and what that was about.
And why they were taking care of the child. Yeah.
Exactly. Like that scene that we read at the beginning kind of emerged whole cloth, but it gave me a lot of information that I had to work with. Like the aunt was pregnant, there was going to be a kid, she was going to be, you know, all this stuff sort of emerged in that scene. So I feel like they're little kernels like that. But this, you know, this book took like 6 years or something because of figuring it out with parenthood. And I imagine the next one will take some time, but also, who knows? I mean, I'm craving writing time. So as time starts to open up for me a little bit more, maybe something will just.
We'll just, yeah, absolutely. And another question, of course, is the particular sadness of Lemon Cake. Is that being adapted in any way?
You know, there's been interest. It's a great question because I have a lot of conflict about it, but there have been various people that have been interested, and I feel like I haven't quite hit the right match because the book, there are a couple ways to read the book. There's a kind of fun sort of let's find feelings in food thing that I feel like can kind of work on the like TV world. But it's a lightness that I feel like the book is ultimately quite sad, and that there's a lot of family dynamics and sort of stuff about sensitivity in that book. And I feel like for the readers that have expressed real connection to that book, which has meant so much to me, I kind of feel like I want to stick by them and not do it unless it feels like something is clicking.
Please stick to your guns on that, because it would be so easy to make that feelings in food show. It would be so easy, but it wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be here I am, I'm giving you a special lecture now.
I'll take it.
Aimee, come on, stay true to yourself as a writer.
No, I need it, Bethanne. I really need it, because it's been hard to be like, well, this could be cool. But there's something about that book in particular that I feel like I want to stand by tonally.
I think your readers are going to be very happy ultimately that you did. And I'm sure, given the plethora of what's happening now with really good adaptations being made, that will happen. So I'll definitely hold a butterfly in my throat. But I know we don't have any more questions right now. And Julia, I knew it just as I was like getting into something else, Julia was going to pop back on and say, we're out of time. So.
Well, if you would indulge us, we do have a bonus question from Politics and Prose that we love to ask our authors and speakers, which is, besides a copy of The Butterfly Lampshade, which we should all run and get right now, what else is on your bedside table that you'd like to recommend to our listeners out there?
That was my question, Julia.
Yeah, we'd love to know.
I love it. And I mean, like, my bedside table is so close, but I can't get up and get it. But I'm reading Long Division by Kisei Lehman, who I might be saying his name wrong, but it's so great. The voice is amazing. It's so funny. So I'm really enjoying that. I just picked up at the bookstore The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which is an Agatha Christie I read when I was like 14 and loved. And I was like, I think I need to read this again.
Yes.
And I also just finished The Secret Life of Church Ladies, which was super sexy. And
that is awesome. Adisha Philia is just a national treasure, truly.
It was so good. And the voice was so good. Oh my God. Yeah. And then I'm reading an early copy of Claire Vaye Watkins' novel, which is fantastic. So very good. So I think it'll be, I don't know when it'll be out, but super good. And then I saw one more question. Should I?
Think so it was about your dad, your psychiatrist father.
I love it. I mean, a ton of influence in that. I have like a very sort of open, artistic mother who had this really severely ill sister, and then she married a psychiatrist, my father, who's a psychoanalyst. So it's like the sort of world of the unconscious kind of governed our home, and it was sort of like the arts and the world of the kind of psychoanalytic. Huge influence, and fascinating ultimately. And for this particular story, I know that the part of it that does come from my growing up, he was a real help. Like, there really was, these were conversations that kind of needed to be had within the family. So suddenly there was a voice of someone who knew something. And also, of course, I mean, there are all kinds of psychiatrists, but he was a good one. So that was really, really helpful.
And thank you, Leslie, for that question. That's a great question.
It was a great question.
And thanks from us at Politics and Prose to Aimee Bender, Bethanne Patrick, and our audience out there for chiming in with these really thoughtful and engaging questions. Your patronage and dedication enable us to bring you this amazing programming, and we couldn't do it without the book sales to support it. So go ahead and follow the link in the chat to get your copy of The Butterfly Lampshade, or you can click on over to politics-prose.com. And while you're there, make sure you check out our events calendar for everything else coming up this summer. And from our shelves to yours, we hope everyone out there is staying strong, staying safe, and of course, staying well read. We will see you next time. Thank you so much, Aimee. Thank you so much, Bethanne.
Thank you so much, Julia.
We really, really thank you.
Yeah, Bethanne, those were absolutely wonderful questions.
Oh, thanks, Aimee. Thank you for The Butterfly Lampshade. And Julia, thanks to P&P as always.
As always.